Welcome to a Sunday morning service brought to you by the San Gabriel Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Georgetown, Texas. I am Reverend Sandy Ingham, San Gabriel's interim minister. You might be watching this anytime, not necessarily on Sunday morning, the 17th of May, 2020. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever time you tune in, you are most welcome here. This church is a welcoming congregation and a green sanctuary. If you would like to know more about Unitarian Universalism in general, visit uua.org. To learn more about this congregation in particular, go to sangabrieluu.org. A gentle reminder to read our weekly newsletter, which now has a name. It's The Messenger. In our time of grief, we light a flame of sharing, the flame of ongoing life. In this time, when we search for understanding and serenity in the face of loss, we light this sign of our quest for truth, meaning, and community. Our opening hymn is "Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child." The opening words are titled "The Peace of Wild Things," and they were written by Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come in to the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. Please share the affirmation now, and you may sing it or say it, whichever way you're more comfortable with.
service, service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, and serve humanity in fellowship. Peace, freedom, and fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant, thus do we covenant with each other.
Hello, Karina, and thank you for bringing the Wonder Box story today, which, that story, all of us, no matter what age we are, we love to hear the stories.
Thank you, Reverend Sandy. It's wonderful to be here with all of you today. I miss you all very much. So, a Wonder Box. Here it is. What could our wondering minds help us to learn and grow today? Make a guess. If you're with someone, tell them what your guess is. I'm going to open it up. I've got a box of tissues. What does that make you think of? Having a cold, being sick, feeling sad. Reverend Sandy is preaching about sadness today, which is hard. It's a hard topic. It can be hard to admit that we're feeling sad. Maybe because sadness can be scary. So I've got a book just about that. Let's take a look. Our book is called When Sadness is at Your Door, written and illustrated by Eva Eland. Sometimes sadness arrives unexpectedly. It follows you around and sits so close to you, you can hardly breathe. You can try to hide it, but it feels like you've become sadness yourself. Try not to be afraid of sadness. Give it a name. Listen to it. Ask it where it comes from and what it needs. If you don't understand each other, just sit together and be quiet for a while. Find something you both enjoy, like drawing, listening to music, or drinking hot chocolate. Maybe sadness doesn't like to stay inside. Try letting it out sometimes. Go for a walk through the trees. You can listen to their sounds together. Maybe all it wants to know is that it is welcome. And to go to sleep, knowing it is not alone. When you wake up, it might be gone. Don't worry. Today is a new day. The end. And I like this end paper where we see all kinds of people working with or through their sadness in lots of different ways. we have some reasons to be sad right now. You may not be feeling sad, but if you are, I think it's good to think about why that might be, to really name that sadness. I like the part of the book where the author says, sadness may not like being inside. And yes, it's good to go outside in the fresh air and take a walk, but I also think keeping sadness inside ourselves might not be such a good thing, and that one of the best ways we can welcome sadness and work through our sadness is by talking about it with one another, with someone else close to you. And I hope our San Gabriel community helps you in that respect too. I hope we are here for one another, connected. So when we meet again at 2 p.m. today in our RE time, we'll talk a little more about welcoming sadness and the different things we do to let it go. I'll see you then.
Thank you, Karina. We have a special element in today's service. The fellowship choir is going to sing Guide My Feet. Now, our choir generally sings about once a month, but they did not perform in March or in April, largely because new technology had to be learned and mastered before they were able to reintroduce this actually common or normal part of a Sunday morning service, and we call it the musical interlude. In another week or two, we hope to be able to add one of the last remaining pieces of our usual program, the offertory. I know you're all looking forward to that. Stay tuned. Here's the choir.
Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. Guide my feet while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Race in vain. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. Hold my hand while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Race in vain. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. Stand by me while I run this race. For I don't want to run this race in vain. Race in vain.
Thank you, Susan, and choir members. I invite everyone now to enter into a few moments of silence and meditation. The reading that I want to share with you today is titled A Little Piece of Our Souls, and it was written by Stephen F. Smith. Everywhere we go, we take our souls with us. And every time we meet someone, we wrap a little piece of our souls around them and pass it through them. All our lives, we weave our souls around and through everyone we meet, tying a complex tangled web to the earth. This is who we are to the world around us. Each of us has 1,000, 1,000,000 tendrils of each other's souls wrapped around us and through us. And this is who we are to ourselves. Sometimes we need to grasp these tendrils for all we're worth, just to keep ourselves here. Sometimes the tendrils snap and we can't weave anymore. But the 1,000, the 1,000,000 threads we have already woven remain tangled messily about the earth. This is still who we are, and we aren't diminished. But it does leave a hole. You have wrapped your soul around me and through me 1,000, 1,000,000 different times. If I gather all these threads in my hands and hold tight, and if you hold on to all the threads that have ever pierced your soul, wrapping them around you like a protective cloak, anchoring you to the ground, maybe the threads won't snap, and you can keep weaving a little longer. If it snaps anyway, I will take all the threads you have left me and wrap them around a spool that I will carry with me always. But try not to let your tendrils snap. I'd like to feel you weaving your soul around me and through me for a little while longer. Truly, the only thing spreading more rapidly than the virus is grief, ended a letter to the editor of the New Yorker magazine in a recent issue. The letter was in response to an article about the death of a doorman, a beloved doorman in New York City, from COVID-19. By telling a human story behind all the statistics we are bombarded with endlessly, the reader and the writer of this letter thanked the New Yorker for widening our comprehension of what is happening behind the numbers. I asked you in my newsletter blurb, which of course you've all read, in that blurb about today's service, if grief could be good. I went on to say that in this dark time in human history, grief is widespread and it is many layered. Even in normal times, the process of grieving, in this culture at least, is often ignored or not given its just due. Grieving for what we have lost during the past 2 months is just one aspect of the kind of grief a worldwide crisis causes. The kind of grief that is happening now affects everyone, whether or not they acknowledge it. And the kind of grief that goes along with the virus and our economic woes isn't only about those two life-challenging threats. Today's grief is also a culmination of every past grief that humankind has already been through. Can we use grief to build community during these times, rather than letting grief add to the chaos all around us? Can we transform our grief for the world into gratitude and even joy? I find myself grieving a lot these days for so many things. I swear, from the sublime to the ridiculous. Much of what I grieve, it's not particularly important at all in the overall scheme of things. Does it matter if I am having trouble finding the precise peanut butter that I want? Of course not. I grieve for myself. That might also be known as a pity party, because I had to cancel an end of April trip to the bottom of Grand Canyon. I found myself in tears a few days ago, standing beside a blooming cactus in my neighborhood. I would be seeing oceans of these cactuses around Phantom Ranch there at the bottom of Grand Canyon if I could have made that trip. And I try to time it with the blooming of the cactus, but that doesn't always work. But again, this is a personal, almost selfish, coming from a place of privilege kind of grief. Not good or not bad, but it's just there. It's the loss of something. And it is not unimportant that we pay attention to all these small personal griefs, but the mistake would be if we stopped there, ignoring the universal griefs. And then there's a kind of, maybe middle area of grieving for what is gone because of the pandemic. Not life-threatening, but sad. General Assembly, our association's annual meeting and gathering. General Assembly is an example. Oh yes, there will be a virtual GA this year, but it's not going to be the same thing at all. No actual live human contact with hugging and arms around shoulders, people sitting around tables, laughing, enjoying a meal together, just having coffee. Worse is the loss of momentum that we have been gathering at these past General Assemblies, particularly our association's work on racism and systemic change within our organization. Infomercial time. Consider attending General Assembly online this year. The upside of virtual GA is that it is significantly less expensive. Registration is $150 as opposed to about $450. And there are scholarships available. The most important grief that all of us must acknowledge and then work together to transform is grief for humanity, for this world of ours. The current catastrophe brings up long-standing griefs we all should feel about this country. I grieve for all the pain that the virus, combined with economic slowdown, is causing. That grief brings up all the grief I was already struggling with for those people in prisons, for all people who do not have adequate, affordable health care, for those caught in domestic violence and now even more stuck in that violence, for people in detention centers, for people fleeing violence, seeking sanctuary in countries that don't want to help, that want to send these wounded brothers and sisters of ours back to dangerous, horrific situations. The year 2020 marks many big anniversaries of big moments in our history, and my grief expands to include these events. The 50th anniversary of Kent State and Jackson State, which wasn't quite the same thing, but it happened at the same time. The 50th anniversary of Earth Day, the 75th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day on May 8th, the 100th anniversary of women being able to vote in the United States. Grief begets anger. I cannot believe the story that we are hearing from Brunswick, Georgia. Yet another story of the senseless killing of an unarmed young black man by white men. And that brings up so many incidents where I grieve. Why should I be surprised that one more has been added to the seemingly never-ending list of atrocities in this country, going back to the white people's treatment of Native Americans? And that brings up my grief that will never end around mass shootings. Columbine in 1999. I have a 6 degrees of separation connection to the Columbine tragedy. I served the congregation in Plattsburgh, New York from 1998 as their intern, and then in 1999 to 2000 as an interim. Eric Harris, one of the shooters, left Plattsburgh in July of 1993. He was 12 years old. He had lived in Plattsburgh since the 3rd grade. He went to the religious education program at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Plattsburgh. He still corresponded with juniors and seniors in high school in our RE program there, and the CIA or the FBI or somebody came in and confiscated computers, the phones of all of those juniors and seniors. They didn't have phones, but they had computers. I wish that the list of mass shootings ended in December of 2012. On December 14th at Sandy Hook Elementary School, 20 children and 7 adults killed. And that is the one mass shooting that I cannot get past at all. Yet the killings continue. I grieve. Grief demands our attention. Grief wants us to pay attention, not to deny our emotions, but to let them flow and let them guide us to a place of healing, yes, but just as importantly, to a place of action, to a place of positive disintegration. Despite my Bodhisattva title, I will remind you that I'm officially a Buddhist nun. I think that it is perfectly fine not to go completely Buddhist when it comes to grieving and attempt to let it all go eventually. No, don't let it all go. Let's keep some of our grief so that we are always prepared to channel that grief into action against injustice, so that we learn that we are capable of turning our sorrow into better decisions in the struggle to become more fully human. Grief demands to be transformed into positive ways of being, making it good grief. Some of the definitions of grief actually go back to the year 1300. Mental pain, sorrow, hardship, suffering, bodily affliction. These come from an old French word meaning wrong, grievance, injustice, misfortune, calamity, and also from a Latin word meaning make heavy, cause grief. From dictionary.com, keen mental suffering or distress over affliction or loss, sharp sorrow, painful regret. Note those adjectives. Those are serious, sharp, hard to take words. Good grief. The phrase came into usage in 1912, and all the sources I looked at were very precise about the year. The phrase is probably derived from good Lord, which came from good God, both of which were considered blasphemous. So we get good grief. Dictionary.com tells us that the expression is used as an exclamation of dismay, surprise, or relief. The phrase became popular beginning in the 1950s thanks to Charles Schulz, author of the comic strip Peanuts. And because I believe in making you smile as much as I can, I have a little excerpt here from a book titled Linus on Life by the aforementioned Charles Schulz. And this is Linus ruminating on art. Hey, he says to Lucy, his big sister, you must stop one of my best drawings. Here's another one of my drawings. Good grief. Don't you realize that these drawings of mine are art? Some art should never be mushed up, Linus tells us. There are many synonyms for grief, and they're fascinating. Anguish, heartache, woe, misery, sadness, melancholy, moroseness. And there is only one antonym that I found. But I'm going to keep you in suspense on that one for a few minutes. And I added one myself. Can we use grief to build community during these times rather than letting grief add to the chaos all around us? Can we transform our grief for the world into gratitude and even joy? The process of transforming grief begins with the development of 3 skills: attending, befriending, surrendering, or ABS, as Miriam Greenspan labels it. For easier remembrance, probably, Greenspan is an internationally known psychotherapist, writer, and speaker. I recommend her book, Healing Through the Dark Emotions, from which I have learned much about those so-called dark emotions. Attending is more than just paying attention to what grief is trying to teach us. In Greenspan's words, to attend to grief is to sense it in the body, to focus your awareness on it and name it accurately. Befriending. You have to feel it if you want to heal it, Greenspan says, meaning, among other things, that there is no set timeline for how long you need to feel grief before you can befriend it and transform it. Greenspan said that when she was getting her degree, 6 months, she was taught that 6 months is the amount of time to get over grief. And then after that, it was 2 months. 2 months became the suggested amount of time to get over grief. When my friend Craig's wife died, and his wife was both a friend of mine and a colleague, Craig said to me, well, I'm going to give myself 1 year, and he named the date 1 year later, and that will be time enough. I will be over Sue by then. I wasn't a minister then. Seminary wasn't even in my thoughts, but I thought, that just doesn't feel right to me. And finally, that word surrendering. Greenspan's phrase for this skill is, to let it go, you have to let it flow. This takes lots of befriending time and lots of truth-telling to yourself and to others. You don't run away from hurt and pain. You surrender to it. You actually, ideally, run right into the midst of it. Connected detachment, in Greenspan's words. I think connected detachment is the same thing as the positive disintegration that I referred to earlier. So these are 3 skills that will help us transform grief into positive ways of action, being, living, while still keeping the grief within us. These are the skills that each generation must learn so that the next generations understand and don't make the same mistakes we have made. Future generations must also work on the problem of unredemptive grief, that is untransformed, often unacknowledged grief. We must begin to show them the way. Greenspan follows her 3 skills with 7 steps to be taken next. Emotional alchemy, she calls this, in the work of transforming grief. But we don't have time for this today. I want to know, says Wendell Berry, I want to know as fully and exactly as I can what the wound is and how much I am suffering from it. And I want to be cured. I want to be free of the wound myself. And I do not want to pass it on to my children. I know if I fail to make at least the attempt, I forfeit any right to hope that the world will become better than it is now. Barbara Rhodey, in her wonderful collection of essays in the Simple Morning Lights, writes this, and she titles it, For My Friends Who Are Wounded. If I could, I would go to them and say, it was only a dream. I would sit beside them and let their tears fall on the soft sleeves of my gown. I would kiss their hair. I would talk softly to them. I would tell them the secrets of fireflies and stars and the frost lace on the windows, and the harvesting of corn. I would sing the grandfather's songs. I would bring small gifts in my hand, white spiraled shells and crimson leaves, smooth stones, a hyacinth, a peach. Then we would stand by the window, our arms around each other's waists. We would breathe in the cold night air. We would make promises and wait silently, still, listening for the bright, brave, astonishing light. Can we use grief to build community during these times rather than letting grief add to the chaos around us? Can we transform our grief for the world into gratitude and even joy? And that is gratitude, right? Joy. And what is gratitude if not a form of joy? Good grief. The only word that I found as an antonym, as an opposite of grief, is joy. But gratitude works too. That's the word that I added. What are we mourning? What are we not mourning? What people in grief need most, Greenspan tells us, is to be compassionately accompanied. Compassionately accompanied. To feel that those who care about them are willing and able to tolerate the pain that they are in, to be there with them, to be present. End of Greenspan's quote. But isn't that one of the most important things that we can do as a faith community? Isn't that why we're here? We exist to be those people who compassionately accompany one another through this journey of life, not only during the good times, but equally and as importantly through the dark emotions. The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. said, "If we do not act, we shall surely be dragged down the long, dark, and shameful corridors of time, reserved for those who possess power without compassion, might without morality, and strength without sight." Some might say, with good reason, that is exactly what we have right now in the spring of 2020. We have those who possess power without compassion, might without morality, and strength without sight. And many of us feel grief about this lack of compassion, of morality, and strength without sight. We are grieving. We are in mourning. All of us are in a grieving process, whether we are aware of it or not. Greenspan says, the gift that grief offers us is the capability to see deeply into the way things are. Life is limited. We are here for a short time. Grief asks us to know this, not only in a disembodied, cerebral way, but in the marrow of our bones. End of quote. Can we use grief to build community during these times rather than letting grief add to the chaos around us? Can we transform our grief for the world into gratitude and even joy? Yes, we can. And we even have roadmaps for aiding us along the way. Yes, we can do these things as long as we continue to compassionately accompany each other. Good grief. Just as long as we have breath, we must answer yes to life, to truth to love. Please sing that hymn now, just as long as I have breath. The chalice extinguishing words were written by Brian Keeley. The chalice is extinguished, but its light lives on in the minds and the hearts and the souls of each one of us. Let us carry the flame with us and share it with those we know, with those we love, and most especially with those we have yet to meet. The closing words were written by Jean M. Olson, and she titled them, Go Boldly. May you be brave enough to expose your aching woundedness and reveal your vulnerability. May you speak your deepest truths, knowing that they will change as you do. May you sing the music within you, composing your own melody, playing your song with all your heart. May you draw, paint, sculpt, and sew, showing the world your vision. May you write letters, poetry, biography, slogans, graffiti, the great novel, laying bare your words to love and hate. May you love even though your heart breaks again and again. And until the end of your days, may your life be filled with possibilities and courage. May it be so. Amen. Until we meet again, go in peace, love, and compassion.